Right, this card had a few robberies on it. I don't think this was the main robbery. I think this fight here was a close fight, which, in my opinion, Chris Curtis won. And when I say he won the fight, it was between rounds 2, 3, and 5. And the reason I'm going to say 5 is, what happened at the end was an injury. It wasn't a shot from Brendan Allen what caused his leg to buckle like that. That's probably a fight where, not a fight, an injury where he's come off the couch to go and fight Brendan Allen in a 5-round fight. His body's not fully prepared because he hasn't had all the time in the world to train and do everything for it, not had a fully proper camp like Brendan Allen. And because of his age as well, these injuries happen. So the later on in the fight, the worse it is for his joints and ligaments and that type of stuff. Apart from that, at the end, Chris Curtis was doing better in the striking, especially in that 5th round at that point, because you were noticing that Brendan Allen is just constantly shooting in for these takedowns. And one thing I want to say about Brendan Allen's takedowns are, he never uses any good setups when he goes for them. So yeah, he's shooting on him, being safe and not getting knocked out. But what he's doing is ending up in a position where they're in the sprawl and eating these punches to the head. And Chris Curtis each time, if his leg didn't give out in the 5th round, I think the judges maybe would have given it to him, because if you're thinking from the judges' perspective, they can see a guy who is doing well in the striking, but then you're seeing Brendan Allen shoot on him and take the back at one point, and then you see him with 10 seconds left start backing up like he's hurt, but they don't realise, I believe the judges, that it's actually an injury that he's sustained at that point. So immediately they're putting down on the card that Brendan Allen won that round, when in reality Chris Curtis actually did. If you watch the whole round as a whole, the 5th round specifically, the boxing of Chris Curtis was very good, because stopped the takedowns, hitting him in the head. And it wasn't just that, throughout the fight, you even saw, remember that point in the fight where he rocked Brendan Allen? And I believe this happened twice. It wasn't just once, but the main one, and it's by straight punches. And this is because Brendan Allen, he's a bit chinny. He can't help it. If you've got a bad chin, train your neck all you want. At the end of the day, it's going to come down to your genetics, your chin, to whether you're going to get knocked out by a punch. And he has kind of delayed reactions, because you see Brendan Allen get hit as he's coming into range with the southpaw jab. And as he's coming forward, remember, Brendan Allen's one of those guys, again, not like Chris Curtis, where he doesn't move his head off the centre line when he's coming to throw strikes. So immediately, as he's coming into range, he eats a straight right to the nose. And it looks like some tooth or something flew out. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was just a bit of spit. But when he does that, it immediately drops his hands and he gets caught with that right hook. And remember, what happened when they fought last time? That hook did a lot of damage. And it was like his brain got PTSD from when that happened, because you see the delayed reaction of Brendan Allen. The legs start to buckle, and this is where he does the smart thing, shoots for a takedown. And I don't know why he wasn't doing it more in the fight, because you're fighting Chris Curtis. Yeah, he's got good takedown defense, but you don't want to stand up there and try and box with him. And he did, and he had some success at times, but the majority of the time he didn't. And in this moment here, shooting for the legs was the right thing to do. But if he had done that more often in the fight and fought like he did against Paul Craig, even though it looks boring, you would still argue that there was more of a debate for him winning the fight. Because in this round here, we all know he didn't win. He looked like he was winning up until this rock happened. But remember, we have to talk about damage. And this was the most damaging sequence of this round. And not only that, the boxing of Brendan Allen, it looked all right. But again, it was Curtis landing the hardest shots, especially to the body. If you look at before he rocked him, he actually starts all of this by throwing an uppercut to the body. And that predominantly makes him kind of have to lower his hands. And then it looked like he went to go for a level change, and that's before the rock happens. And that's what I'm talking about. Brendan Allen, his striking will work, but when he comes up against proper boxers who like to sit down on their punches like Curtis, and especially a southpaw guy like him who's a specialist in boxing, this is not going to work. He made this fight so much harder than it needed to be for him. And like I've mentioned before with the takedown, this was a perfectly executed takedown. But again, this only works because Chris Curtis is a boxer. If he tried to do this against a guy he was like good at Muay Thai and stuff like that, he would really struggle because they'd be light on the feet and they wouldn't be very heavy on that front leg. So it'd be much harder to just shoot in without a setup to take them down. And no, when you see moments like this, I've got the image on the screen right here. This right now is the equivalent of what Merab does. You're on his back. Yeah, you're trying to get a submission attempt, but you can't get anything from here. Like, he isn't getting anything significant, so you cannot score him around for this. And I know none of us scored round 3 for Chris Curtis, but then when you look at round 5, he got into a similar position to this, but it was actually on the ground getting the body triangle. But again, if you're not being active, doing any ground and pound, yeah, you're fighting the hands trying to get the choke, but you're not getting it underneath the neck, you're not getting any tight squeeze, you're not even neck cranking him, you're just trying to play the hand battle, you shouldn't really be scoring points for this because you're not doing anything significant. If you slid it underneath the neck and he was getting that squeeze and he had like Chris Curtis gasping for air, then maybe, but that didn't happen. But one thing I have to give Alan credit for is, even though I think he didn't win this fight, he's a very good round 1 fighter because you'll notice he throws a lot of combinations in the first round that land. He's got very good striking accuracy in the first round. A bit like Terence McKinney, how he's got a good first round but can drift in fights. It's the same with Alan a little bit. He can drift despite having a very good first round, and especially against a boxer, it's inevitable to happen because he could do this all day, Chris Curtis, if he wasn't injured. And those elbows that he was landing on Chris Curtis as well were very effective, and the leg kicks as well, because when you think of Brendan Allen, he's not one of them guys. He's pretty much when it comes to striking, just basic 1-2s. He doesn't throw like any crazy wild combinations like Curtis where he'll come to the body with like an uppercut and then hook you and rock you. He's not that type of opponent. Yes, he can drop people down with the 1-2 because it's quite effective, but he's not like a striking specialist like Curtis. So yes, it'll work against guys like Bruno Silva, who are just one of the most inconsistent performers in the UFC. The guy got dropped by Jared Mearshart, which I still don't get to this day. But when it comes to fighting against people at their own game, who are strikers, I think he's really going to struggle. Because I believe his brain will shut down. I know Chris Curtis couldn't knock him out, but I'm thinking if that's Paulo Costa, although you might say he hasn't got as much power as he used to, I would disagree because you've got to think, he fought Marvin Vettori where if he threw that kick to anyone else, they would have been knocked out cold. He put Robert Whittaker on skates to the point where if there was a few more seconds left, he would have been out cold. The Luke Rockhold fight, one thing I'll say about that is when you're both gassed, it's going to be hard to generate the power because you're just too tired and you can't exert that force when you're so tired. So, in my opinion, I would want to look at a fight with Paulo Costa and Brendan Allen next. He really deserves to get like that top 5 push because if my eyesight isn't wrong, that's number 6. So I believe he doesn't need to be fighting up anymore. He needs to fight like a Paulo Costa is perfect. He hasn't got a fight. He had a warm-up fight, and that's the type of fight we should be looking at. And I think Paulo Costa has a good chance in that because he can stop takedowns, he can wrestle, and his striking, although it's fell off a little bit, he has power. And Brendan Allen showed that his chin can be a bit vulnerable. And with Paulo Costa's power, that could be another problem because, don't get me wrong, Allen's a good fighter, but Chris Curtis at times seemed to be more active. Like, how has Chris Curtis outlanded Brendan Allen in that fight? Because we always talk about Chris Curtis as being this fighter who's so inactive. But as of recently, it seems like he's stepping it up a little bit. Like, in this fight here, started off the first round quite fast. Yeah, he didn't win in terms of the landed strikes, but he was trying. And he wasn't just sitting there waiting for his opponent to do what they wanted to do. He was pushing the pace. And that's one problem with Curtis. He can usually moan because the opponent never wants to press him and fight in the pocket, whereas Brendan Allen did, which is why it became more of a favourable fight. Instead of shooting for these takedowns, like double legs even, or single legs, because you don't really have to worry about Chris Curtis's jiu-jitsu. Despite him putting him in like a front headlock multiple times, he's not going to submit you from there because he just doesn't have that jiu-jitsu background to perform them type of submissions like anacondas and darces. So regarding the scorecard, in my opinion, I wouldn't be sitting here screaming robbery, robbery, robbery. The only robberies like that are the John Jones, Dominic Reyes. It was nothing near to that level. But if I take you to how I would score the fight, for me, I will say it again, 48-47 Chris Curtis, winning rounds 2, 3, And 5, the damage part of the fight, which, in my opinion, Chris Curtis won. If this was, what was it, 1FC rules, maybe Brendan Allen would have won because they judge it more of a whole and the grappling will be more favoured compared to in the UFC. We have to base each round off damage. And I believe the rounds I've selected, Chris Curtis did more damage. But like I said, we've got UFC 300, so there's no point screaming and shouting that it was a robbery because it wasn't. But it was a fight where Chris Curtis should have won that fight. But Brendan Allen, Costa. If not, just do Strickland. So thank you for watching. Talk to you soon.